Welcome everybody to our webinar today, and thank you for joining us today for our Sequana Stream Webinar Series on net zero, striking the right balance. We're really grateful that you've been able to join us today, taking the time out of your busy days and join in on this important discussion. For those who don't know me, my name is Rhys Anderson. I'm Associate Director here at Sequana, and I will be moderating today's webinar. We would like to start with acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting and where we live and work across Australia, and recognise their deep connections to land, water, sky and community. And we pay our respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and cultures today. We have a busy agenda for our webinar today, and hopefully filled with insights from our expert panel. For a reminder for all those attending today, we will be recording this session and we'll make it available to attendees following. And we'll also have time at the end of today's presentation for questions from the audience as well. For a bit of context for our conversation today, in 2023, which is a few years ago now, 35 to 40% of Australia's total electricity generation was from renewable energy sources. That includes solar, wind, and hydro. And this has continued to grow at an increasing rate as more solar, wind, both onshore and offshore, battery storage, and hydro projects are implemented across the country. Securing the energy supply for many of Australia's industries, including the water sector, is a key consideration towards net zero. Renewable energy projects necessary to continue the transition from fossil fuels can still have their environmental impacts. Large-scale solar, on and offshore wind farms, batteries and pumped hydro projects, and the transmission infrastructure needed for connection have the potential to impact wildlife, ecosystems, land use, and local communities. There is a real need to get the balance right when it comes to supporting Australia's net zero goals by implementing large-scale renewable energy projects across the country. More than that, though, projects must move beyond minimising impact to promoting net positive environmental outcomes and community benefits. We've had some recent projects that have highlighted the difficult balance between delivering renewable energy infrastructure and the needs of the environment. The Willatook Wind Farm in Victoria and Robbins Island Wind Project in Tassie have highlighted the challenge of managing competing policy objectives, such as achieving net positive biodiversity and Australia's goals towards the transition to renewable energy. Just as by way of context, for those who might not be familiar with Willatook, compliance with the recommended buffers to protect the breeding grounds of brolgas required a reduction in approximately 2/3 of the total number of proposed turbines and a 5-month moratorium on construction throughout the brolga breeding season. In the case of Robbins Island, a decision by the Commonwealth has been delayed again until the federal election. While some might see such challenges as a constraint to achieving net zero, we do believe that the energy transition and decarbonisation are compatible with protecting and enhancing Australia's natural and cultural heritage. Today, with our panel participants, we intend to discuss and expand on these key issues, striking the balance between project delivery and meeting the needs and expectations of our community and the environment. We'll also touch on how Sequana's growing environment and planning teams can help bring strategic and innovative thinking to delivery, working with clients to provide better outcomes. This session will follow a sort of conversation format, a discussion where I'll share questions with our panelists on the importance of integrating environment and water management into the energy sector to minimize impacts and promote sustainable development. First, let's introduce our panelists, and we'll start with you, please, Deb.
Great. Thanks, Rhys. Look, thanks everyone for coming today, and really excited to be part of today's conversation. It's really good to see a few familiar people listening in. So for those people that don't know, I'm the newly appointed Director of Strategic Environment and Planning. So this is a new role within Sequana and a new and growing work stream. So really excited to have the opportunity to showcase some of our knowledge today, but also to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing. So I bring almost 25 years of broad experience to this role, and my background has been predominantly in the delivery of major infrastructure projects. So I've been lucky enough to work across urban and regional settings across Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia and the Middle East, focusing on the delivery of strategic and statutory land use advice, as well as planning and environmental advice. So my work has been with state and Commonwealth regulators in advisory roles and developing policy, and with major clients across the water, energy, transmission, mining and transport sectors. Most recently, I worked for a global offshore wind developer as the Director of Environment and Planning for Australia. So having the opportunity to work across a range of different regions across Australia and experience a range of different, climates. So in this role, I had the opportunity to work with lots of governments at all different levels, scientists, transmission line providers, port infrastructure, and a whole range of other activities. So back to you, Rhys, to introduce Madeleine.
Excellent, Deb. Yeah, thank you, Deb. I'll pass on to you, Maddie.
Thanks, Rhys, and nice to meet you all. I'm the Regional Environment and Planning Lead for Sequana, and I too have quite a number of years of experience in environmental management and also as a project manager, nearly 24 years now. And I've delivered large-scale multidisciplinary projects across a range of industries, most recently in renewables, but quite heavily in roads and water and wastewater industries as well. I've worked for the government, I've worked client-side and also as a consultant. A key part of my job over this time has been managing environmental impact assessments and the application delivery of planning and environment approvals. And I believe I've been really fortunate to work across all project stages, so planning, design, construction, and all the way into operation. So yeah, thanks, Rhys.
Excellent. Thanks, Maddie. And last but by no means least, Owen Boushel, great to have you join us today. If you could introduce yourself too, please.
Thanks for having me. So that's right, Owen Boushel, Manager of Stakeholder Engagement here at Tilt Renewables. So I lead stakeholder engagement across our portfolio of projects. We've got about 10 operating generators and another 5 late-stage development projects, as well as 1 in construction. So I've been with Tilt Renewables for 3 years, but this is a 20-year journey for me in terms of the infrastructure space. So I've had the privilege of working across all states, and with the exception of 1 territory, I haven't quite worked in Northern Territory yet. But no, I've had the opportunity to work across generation, so lots of different types of generation, as well as extractors, transport, and other forms of linear infrastructure. So really looking forward to sharing some of my observations on, particularly on the community engagement and benefit sharing space.
Amazing. It's great to have you join us today, Owen. Now, what we want to do is start with a sort of macro scale picture and start with the first question to Deb and to Owen this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are in Australia. What are the biggest challenges in balancing environmental protection with the need for renewable infrastructure development? Thanks, Deb.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say Owen really undersells his experience and his skill sets there. So very excited to hear what Owen's going to say today. So not to start off dramatically, but, I think it's fair to say that nature's legacy is at stake while people are affected by climate-related disasters. And I think, really highlighted with the recent ex-tropical cyclone Alfred. I had to remember that it was an ex. So, what we're seeing in Australia is, really the rapid rollout of renewable energy projects, at the same time as we're working on policies and solutions which minimise the impact on the environment. It's really important to note that the definition of environment as defined by the EPBC Act is really broad and covers ecosystems and all their parts, natural and physical resources, qualities and characteristics of a place, social, economic and heritage aspects, and it also covers the land, the sea, the sky, communities, and tangibles and intangibles. So it's everything basically. So while there's a really strong need for current laws to allow renewable energy projects to develop confidently and to enable investment certainty, there have to be coherent synergies between projects and the environment to ensure that a net positive effect is able to be achieved. With lots of legislation and regulations at a Commonwealth level and every state having its own legislation and regulations, it's really easy to lose sight of the woods for the trees and get caught up in the micro details. Everyone is involved, whether it's a developer, the regulator, the community. Everybody needs to stay focused on the end goal of projects having a net net environmental outcome. In my mind, being able to see, focus on that end, the biggest challenge is actually getting the right site in the first place. And this means applying the principle of avoidance as the absolute first step in identifying any site. Such an approach also demonstrates maturity, a positive mindset, and an understanding, and using, a phrase I hesitate to use, of social license. And this was a really key point picked up by the Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner in 2023. You can't assume that you can offset native vegetation or pay your way out of a discharge. This is really the last place you should be thinking about using to select a site. Hotspot mapping, red flag review, whatever you want to call it, will identify areas of environmental and cultural heritage significance. A desktop assessment combined with a site walkover and an open and honest conversation with the local council, and most importantly, not making any assumptions, is going to reap rewards. A classic example is assuming it's okay to be located in cleared or degraded land. Creatures such as the striped-legged lizard and the western ringtail possum, and even the orange-bellied parrot, love to hang out in modified landscapes. Land availability and land use conflict is also a key issue for consideration. Again, a strong engagement plan is a must. And I won't steal Owen's thunder about this, so he'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. And these are, of course, not the only parameters to navigate. Regulatory regimes are complex, and the length of time projects can take to be approved can take a toll on a project's ability to reach FID. And Madeleine's going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment. At Sequana, we've got a team of experts who are strongly equipped to undertake first-pass assessment and help de-risk projects from the start. So, Rhys, I hope that's a good start. Back to you.
Thanks, Deb. And I thought I'd just take the opportunity, Owen, if there was something in particular around the biggest challenges that you might want to reflect on in a quick summary.
I guess there's two big challenges that jump out. I wholly agree with Deb around the importance of good site selection and making sure that you do your homework, understand the site constraints. But the other part of it, I think, that is important is having, with the each of the different states and so forth, from a community point of view, we do have to strive for some form of procedural fairness. And in many ways, while some of the states have a code accessible approach, some of the states have an impact assessment approach, and they all do vary, good engagement at the beginning that ensures procedural fairness for that community as well as key stakeholders is what regulators and authorities are looking for. So if you get that right, it will make the process a lot easier.
Well, let's move on to the next question and really dive down into a bit more of the detail. And Maddie and Owen, back over to you in this instance. So how do different regulatory regimes across Australia impact project timelines and investment certainty?
Yeah, thanks, Rhys. This is a really good question and something that we've started to address in what Deb and Owen have already talked about. So as we all know, we've got our federal legislation, but all states and territories have different regulatory requirements and policy approaches, which means every project is unique and we certainly can't take a cookie cutter approach. These regulatory requirements and the associated assessments that need to be undertaken can impact project timelines and investment. So we need to have a really strong understanding of what those regulatory frameworks and requirements are for each location. So hot off the press, one of the key deliverables we need at the start of our projects is the approvals pathway for each project. We need to know what it looks like, what we need, and more importantly, what associated works are required and when. And to sort of reiterate some of the things that Deb and Owen said, let's start early. We need to develop our strategies early so that we can avoid impacts, reduce uncertainty, and manage risks to a project. As Deb said before, we've got some very many cryptic species in this country. Some are nocturnal, some are migratory, some are where you think they're going to be. I've had a project where a frog's turned up miles away from where it should be and it stopped us in our tracks. So if we can start our surveys early, then hopefully we can avoid those surprises and those associated costs. I think it's really important as we grow in this industry is that we look for opportunities to co-locate. And the image you can see on this screen is the Delbone wind farm that some of you may be familiar with, which is to be co-located in a pine plantation. But I think to sort of go on what Owen said, I think there's something that is common to all projects and all jurisdictions in this country, and that is our engagement with the community and traditional owners, and that is really important and needs to be done for every single project, and is something that's really common to all of our approvals that's required. Thanks, Rhys.
And if I could just add a little bit there on the traditional owner side of things. Traditional owners are, like, they vary from area or country to country, or state to state, in terms of the level of understanding of what's happening with renewables and their ability to respond appropriately. But one thing that is becoming more common is an expectation with traditional owners to be recognised as right holders in projects, and so that it means that there's an expectation that they are involved in the project from the very outset. So understanding that you're looking at proposals on their country and working through how they might be involved. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that they're seeking control over the whole project, but there's the expectation that they will be treated as right holders throughout the process. And if you start that engagement early with traditional owners, it makes the rest of the process a lot easier, whether it's going through a heritage management planning or even looking at procurement opportunities.
Great. Thanks for that, Owen. And Maddie, I think just to reflect on what you're saying, I think the complexity can have a significant impact then on deliverability of projects. And Deb, the next question really ties right into that. Given the push for net zero, are we moving fast enough on approvals and infrastructure rollout, or are regulatory hurdles or indeed other hurdles slowing our progress?
Thanks, Rhys. I hate to say it, but I don't think we are moving fast enough. And I think, the press over the last couple of days and, really the messaging that we're seeing coming out in this pre-election phase is that there is a general recognition that we are not moving fast enough. Not just moving to net zero, but also moving through the energy transition as well. So I think it's fair to say, even though this is probably no surprise to anybody, that Australia joined the Paris Agreement, there's a real need for Commonwealth and state processes, to align. But really, there's also a need, and I experienced this very much through my offshore wind experience, that there is a need for the states to align to achieve Australia's net zero targets. So, a number of challenges. While Australian Commonwealth legislation applies consistently across the country, we really lack bilateral support for energy policy. And I think, as everybody is probably aware, it's everybody's favourite political football. We also have very short election cycles, which is really not helping us develop a consistent pathway moving forward. And I think, as highlighted by COVID, every state in Australia likes to operate as a fiefdom. We have different policies and different regulations and different timeframes for approvals. We also have different consideration of non-economic impacts, different states treating traditional custodians in different ways. We have different sectorial pathways and economic analyses, and we also have different routes to market for projects as well. So as I said, offshore wind really highlighted this challenge for me, where Victoria has come forward with really strong implementation statements and a route to market, whereas, no disrespect to the New South Wales people on the call, but New South Wales is significantly further behind. And what that means is that there is significantly less investor certainty being able to deliver some of those large-scale renewables. So I think, from an international investor perspective, Australia kind of looks like it's moving in multiple directions. Australia, investors are really looking for stable and clear policies to ensure investments are secure. I'm not saying we sound great. While we are competing in a global supply chain, we've got a global, we're competing for money against other parts of the world. We're also competing for supply chain and workforce as well. So Australia, listen, all the states, we need to be moving in one single direction. So, and we also need to really be actively showing that we're tackling climate risk. I think, as I said at the start, this was really highlighted by ex-cyclone Alfred. We really need to show investors that we have a strong response and that we are able to deal with risks as they arise. Back to you, Rhys.
Thanks, Deb. We have a great group of people who are joining us today for this presentation. It sounds like we need to, get this onto national TV, Deb, so you can make your pitch there. We're going to just unpack some more of the context, and in particular, navigating some of the regulatory complexities, and look at a particular case study. So the Willatook Wind Farm, as I mentioned right at the start of this webinar, the decision around that highlighted how environmental regulations can significantly reduce project scale, how do developers navigate these challenges while still ensuring projects can remain viable. Thanks, Maddie and Owen.
Yeah, thanks, Rhys. For want of repeating myself, I think key to this, especially a project of this scale, is to start early, to plan early and start our assessments and consultation early. Our proponents, they want to avoid surprises, they want to avoid escalating costs and design changes, and they certainly don't want any surprises when you're up and running and in operation. So I think the earlier we can commence our ecology, we can do that at the start of the project, so we can understand the environmental characteristics of the site, any potential impacts and how we can avoid and manage those. As I said before, some of those species are migratory, and we're finding out that, especially for wind farm developments, their patterns of behaviour are not always well understood. So our microbats, we know they're in Australia. We don't always know when they're here, how long they're here, what their flight paths are, what their migratory behaviour patterns are. So if we can start that data analysis and data collection early, then we can go and look at our management measures, things such as curtailment and things like that, potentially location of infrastructure, so we can manage that risk and uncertainty early in the project. So the more data we can have, the more certainty a project can have, and you can avoid those risks. I'm also a big advocate for looking at alternative for advancements in technology when we do our environmental assessments. These assessments aren't cheap, especially in the remote locations that a lot of these projects are now being located. And for people to go out and undertake ecology assessments, especially over multiple seasons, is a big time and cost effort. So there are some new advances in technology, especially in the environmental monitoring space in Australia. Many of us will have heard about the eDNA and how you can identify samples through water analysis, but that's also advancing now into the soil and airspace. So you can start identifying especially some of those more cryptic mammals that are harder to find, like your gliders and your koalas and things like that. So it's fairly cost effective, low human intensity, I guess, because you leave your samples out there for a couple of weeks. So I think that's an opportunity as an industry we can start looking into to get some of our data. This data isn't only important for impact assessment, but it's really important for investment and costs. a seminar that was held recently, some of you may have attended, by ENZ, which looked at how some studies are being undertaken in America where they look at their BAT analysis and their BAT data and how they can look at the curtailment and what the cost impacts are on that early when they slow some of those wind turbines down. They know that early in the project, not during operation, so they're able to look at that investment profile early on. I think we need to look at all aspects or all life cycle aspects of our projects, all the way through to decommissioning. It's certainly something now that we need to do in our approval phases, and it's certainly a question we get asked when we do our community consultation. And early collaboration, I think, as Owen and I have said before, is really important. And looking at all of those different aspects, especially from a traditional custodian perspective, water, soil, biodiversity, sky country, and will help to understand that aspect of environmental impacts. Owen, do you have anything you want to add from a community perspective to that?
Look, there is something I just wanted to, like, more of an observation. I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying there. And I think the one thing it would be worthwhile for us all to keep in mind is that for the projects, for the carbon we wish to offset or the new generation we need to bring online by 2030 or 2035, all of those projects are already in the development process. So it takes about 10 to 14 years to develop a project. So the projects we have to solve our 2030 and 2035 targets are the projects we already have in hand in terms of development. And there's a lot of things that we can do better from a developer perspective, but there's also a lot of things that will probably need to be, as a state or as Australians, need to be a bit more pragmatic about if we're going to meet our 2030 or 2035 targets. And some of the while I can't comment on the Woollatook decision itself, that kind of decision is very hard for a developer to recover from. There's a lot of money that gets invested into a project, and when you look at the renewable sector, there's a lot of sole project companies, and those kind of setbacks are very difficult to overcome. And so we need to be a bit more pragmatic about how, not necessarily, not questioning the Woollatook decision, but we do, when we look across the portfolio of projects that are already in place in Australia, we won't get the perfect project. We want to get the best project that helps us achieve what we need to achieve by 2030 or 2035.
Thanks, Owen. I think that's really insightful. And actually what I'd like to do is just stick with you actually for a moment and move on to sort of community engagement and social license as a particular area of interest. The question for you is that community opposition can often be a major hurdle for renewable projects. So we've just touched on how regulatory regimes can provide a bit of a hurdle, but what strategies have proven effective in building local support for renewable projects?
Yeah. Well, I think it's good to start with acknowledging that community opposition is absolutely okay. It's absolutely normal to oppose change in your community. If we all were given a bit of a vox pop right now on whether we're happy with our neighbours' renovations or house extensions, and I think there would be a mixed response from everybody in this seminar, and I think that's entirely okay. And we have to extend the same sympathy to people in these communities that were placing renewable infrastructure. So, but there are a couple of things that we can do to build local support, and a really important part of that is benefit sharing. So benefit sharing for projects is one of the few things you can give a local community quite a high level of control over in the project. And so it provides them with a degree of control over their own destiny on these projects, as well as helping channel some of their existing knowledge or aspirations into shaping a benefit sharing plan that will deliver great ongoing benefits for that community. And so if you do that, if you have a locally focused benefit sharing program co-designed with the community, that can increase buy-in significantly. And we had an example the other day where we had a number of opponents to one of our wind farms that they got involved in some benefit sharing workshops with us, and it was really good to see them acknowledging their opposition to the wind farm, taking that cap off, putting it to the side, and getting involved in the workshops and seeking to understand how they could best get an outcome for their community that met their community needs and aspirations. So that has gone a long way to not necessarily building support for our project, but acceptance that, okay, if this is going to happen, here's a benefit that we can accrue to the community. Two other things I just want to touch on very quickly is having community engagement that prioritises directly affected members of the community first, and then extending out. So make sure you're engaging with your neighbours very early in the process once you've secured land, so they understand who they can go to if they have any questions, what they can expect, etc. Engaging with council, traditional owners very early in the process. And the other part of it is really around providing clarity in process, timeframes, and how feedback is used. It's really important to collect genuine feedback and work with your project team to understand where will community feedback influence design, where will influence project controls, planning, whatever it might be. Go out, engage with the community on that, and then go back into your project, see what can be done, and really importantly, go back out to the community and close that loop in terms of demonstrating where that feedback has gone, the changes it's generated, and really importantly, what changes couldn't be made, and explain the reason. So, for example, with a turbine, we may see some fairly compelling reasons to move a turbine because of community concerns, but at the same time, moving it might move it into habitat for an endangered species. So be clear about it. Be clear about why you couldn't move that turbine. So if you have benefit sharing, co-designed by community, you have prioritizing those directly impacted first, and being clear about process timeframes and feedback, you'll be in a good place.
Thanks for that, Owen. And I think you've highlighted there the importance of communication and good, clear, frequent communication with stakeholders and the community. So let's continue on with that theme. How can developers and regulators better communicate the long-term benefits of renewables while addressing immediate concerns like noise from the renovations or visual impact and land use?
Yeah, I think all good engagement is honest. Yeah, we have to be honest. And so if you were to rewind 40 years, whether you're building a factory, a generator, logistics hub, there would have been lots of jobs created. That's not the case now. With automation, most of these facilities require very few people. So very importantly, be honest about the benefits that are going to accrue, and there's not going to be a lot of operational roles created by these projects. So if you can be honest about that, then be honest about what are the actual benefits that the project will deliver. So we've spoken about the benefit sharing plan, but what are the other tangible benefits it will bring? So are there particular training opportunities that might manifest during construction that you're setting people up to transition into other industries once the construction stage has been complete? So for example, if you're training people up to be truck drivers to move between the quarry and the site, that might set them up well to take a job in an extractive industry elsewhere or whatever it might be. So if we can be honest and talk through some of those tangible benefits, I think that will help a lot with the communications. And really with concerns, like the concerns raised by the community are legitimate. There are, turbines, BESSs, all generators generate noise of some description. You can see them. There is a visual impact, a landscape impact. So acknowledge those concerns, and take the opportunity to talk with the community about it. But even just facilitating visits to operating sites, a lot of developers are very happy, or operators are very happy to facilitate visits to operating sites so people can experience firsthand what is it like to be beside a turbine, what does it sound like, what does it look like, what does the rehab look like, etc. And really importantly, share the problem with the community. So be clear about the standards that need to be met. In some jurisdictions, if you don't meet your noise requirements, you can't operate your turbine, and you end up with a paperweight in the field, which is an absolute disaster for the project. So be honest with the community and actually share that with them. If we don't get this right, we cannot turn that turbine on. So that way we are incentivized to make sure we absolutely adhere to the noise limits we need to adhere to. And then another really important thing around addressing concerns is making the relevant staff accessible to the community. If people worry about noise, have a noise expert at the drop-in sessions, the person who wrote the report, so they can come ask questions, challenge some of the assumptions, etc. Same applies for visual or other areas that might be of concern to that community, as well as making sure that you've got the engineering staff or the project development staff present.
Thanks, Owen. And a daunting little task there potentially for an acoustician, potentially to front up to a community engagement event, but an important one for that communication piece. We're going to jump ahead just a touch, and actually I'm going to hand over to Maddie. Maddie, if you were to sort of have the opportunity to be starting a project right from the very beginning, how would you navigate the current regulatory framework to enable renewable infrastructure development?
Yeah, thanks, Rhys. So yeah, I think I've sort of talked a little bit about this already. So start that environment planning work early. But I think also really key, it sort of wraps up with some of the things that Owen and Deb have talked about, and that's opportunities we've got for collaboration. So collaboration with other developers. Is there two developers in the same locality? Can you share opportunities? Can you share skills and training development? Can you share workforce camps in terms of how you're going to bring your materials in and things like that? Engage early and collaborate with local councils. A lot of people do want these projects and they want to work together. And I'm a real advocate for local knowledge, Rhys, and I think there's a lot of local knowledge in our communities that we can really tap into, and I think that brings a lot of support for our projects. And there's local environment groups, there's NGOs that are out there trying to help educate people about the benefits of renewables and how to manage them within your community. So I think we need to embrace that knowledge share, both within our communities and within our industry, and work together to deliver our outcome for net zero. Thanks, Rhys.
Thanks, Maddie. We aren't alone in our quests towards net zero. Deb, are there any international examples of best practices in balancing environmental protection with infrastructure that we should be looking to, we should be considering in our project development?
Thanks, Rhys. I think for those people on the call that know me, they know that I could probably talk about this for hours. So I've just picked a couple of examples that I've been particularly passionate about the last couple of years. The first one relates to the United States and offshore wind, and, ignoring the Trump factor. The US government has really done some good work in identifying sites for offshore wind. So unlike the Australian government, the US government has actually gone ahead and de-risked sites. So they have identified particular sites where they want to see offshore wind developed. Unlike in Australia, where we have identified a very broad zone, and then developers have identified for feasibility licenses within those zones. And then they do all the work to understand whether it's a good or a bad site. Given FID is a minimum of, I'm going to say 7 to 10 years away for many offshore wind projects, lots of projects are still going to be in their assessment phase for a long time. And by the time the opportunity comes to bid into market, they're still going to be in that process. There's still going to be a lot of unknowns. And so as a consequence of all of those unknowns, they will be pricing that risk into the price that they give to governments. So the US has done something good here, and hopefully they will continue their good work, because the upshot is it's going to make projects easier to approve, but also in the long run, they will be cheaper to deliver with cheaper electricity as well. The second one is in the Netherlands. And I did try to put a picture up here of some sheep, but obviously that didn't happen. And, this is a space I think that Australia is slowly starting to move into, where we've got adopting a multifunctional infrastructure approach. And so this is really about coexistence and, talking about things like able to have sheep and cattle continue to graze on land where there are solar farms, solar panels, and also where there are wind turbines as well. So really that allows us to maximise, the efficiency of land and also minimise environmental impacts as well, while delivering economic impacts to communities as well. And as I said, we've really, there was some articles last year in the media about coexistence in Australia, where, we really saw the luscious grass and the fattest sheep were under the solar panels, which then equated to the best wool. And so to me, that is the classic opportunity of coexistence. The last one, which I just wanted to highlight, and I think there's a number of people on this call who know that this is also a matter quite close to my heart, transmission infrastructure. So transmission infrastructure companies in Europe have really adopted an integrated vegetation management approach, where land underneath transmission lines is actively managed in a way to support local habitats and to create habitat corridors. This seems to be in direct contrast to what's happening in Australia, and I can see Owen smiling there, where transmission providers here are clearing all of the vegetation under the transmission corridors, within the corridor and even adjacent to the corridor, in response to stakeholder concerns, which include bushfire risk and also reliability. So I think, Rhys, it's fair to say there's a swag of opportunities that we could learn from internationally. And, it's about building up the right networks. And I think, bringing experts from overseas and other jurisdictions, even within Australia, to come and talk about that lived experience of different ways to deliver projects as well.
Thanks, Deb. Owen, I've got 30 seconds in terms of, I need a pitch from you. 30 seconds. In 5 years, what do you hope will have changed in the way that we might plan, approve, and develop renewable energy projects?
30 seconds or less. We need to accept that we have to replace our existing generators. The next one comes offline in 3 years with 1,000 megawatts. We need to replace that in the next 3 years, and we need to replace it with clean, affordable, reliable electricity. If we can use that as our baseline in terms of getting projects approved to meet that critical need for our community, we can't do anything without electricity. So if we can take that as the overarching net community benefit that might be delivered by projects, I think that would be my ideal. I'd love to see that percolating through everything. And there are things around shorter timeframes and looking at the benefit sharing, potential, etc. But that would be on my Santa list.
Love it, love it, and hopefully answered. Oh, and thank you for your insights there. We are grateful for the insights that Deb, Maddie, and Owen that you've been able to share with us so far. And we're not yet just finished. What I want to do is take one step to ask if there are any particular questions from our attendees, our audience, who might have a question. You can put that into the Q&A section. We have someone who's moderating those questions. They'll pass them on to me, and I can ask our panel for those. And while you do that, while you type your questions into that box, I'll just hand over to Deb in terms of being able to touch on how Sequana can help.
Thanks, Rhys. And Owen, I have just put forward some questions which I'd like you to answer as well. So thanks, Rhys. So just really just wanted to share some insights into our new environment and planning team. So this is really a strengthened team and definitely a growing team. So really exciting to have the opportunity to just talk a little bit about the team. So I think it's fair to say that, we're a team of senior specialists. We come from a really diverse background, and we bring all of those experiences to Sequana. We're located across Australia and really focusing on this being an international practice with a growing experience in other jurisdictions as well. So I think if you asked between Maddie, myself and a couple of the other people, if you did a box pop and asked, have you worked in this sector? We would be able to say yes. So we have worked across more sectors than you can imagine, including policy development, onshore, offshore wind, natural resource management, transmission lines, roads, rail, extractive industries, defence, you name it, we have probably worked in it. But what that means is that we, as I said, have a diverse range of experiences, and we've really seen the different ways that projects can be delivered. We've seen what can go wrong and what can go right. And what I think we've really learned is you have to ask questions. You can't be afraid to push boundaries. And sometimes it's really just a matter of interpretation and experience. So that's what you get with a senior team. And that's, really what we're priding ourselves with being able to bring through Sequana. So the other thing I just wanted to highlight is that we really do have an eye on managing risk. Understanding risk means that we can minimise interfaces with legislation. Obviously not trying to get out of doing things, but we can understand where the pinch points are and also where the opportunities are to help enable projects to get to the end, get to FID much quicker. The other thing that we're not afraid is to admit that we can't do something. We're really honest about that, and we're having a really strong focus on developing a network of partners, trusted partners in core disciplines that we can draw on as well. So thank you everybody for coming today. This is a super exciting time for Sequana and really looking forward to the next couple of years. So this slide is just a few things that we can do, but my message to everybody is always don't pigeonhole us, just come and ask us the question.
Fantastic. Thanks, Deb. Well, in those couple of minutes while you're sharing those two slides, we've had a few really good questions come through. So I want to start with a question from Gavin, and maybe if you want to start, Deb, with answering it, but then throw it open to Maddie or Owen as well. Should the LNP win the election, how do you see the approvals and planning landscape adjusting to the potential of nuclear power generation? Great question.
Well, I think there's a few aspects to that. I think it's quite naive of the LNP to think this is going to happen quickly. At the moment, nuclear power generation is prohibited in all states, and including under the EPBC Act. So there's a fair legislative regime that they would need to get through. And, they would need to have the numbers, I think, Owen, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the political expert here, the numbers in all houses in all states to make this happen. But I think what's really important to understand is that the LNP are not just talking about nuclear infrastructure, they're actually talking about a mix. It's just nuclear is the headline, and that's all anybody is saying. So they're not opposed to renewables. They might be opposed to offshore wind in some places, but they are still supportive of renewables. They believe in the mix. Just there's the headline.
Owen, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I will add to it. Like, I think the nuclear question is a very tricky one, and in many ways we've got to be very careful not to pre-guess the outcome on it. And the reason why I say that is that nuclear power is it's part of the policy platform. And when you're building, almost with the exception of BESSs, nearly every single renewable development is in a regional area, and you have the local MPs largely. This is part of their policy platform as well, and it's a well-held view across the broader community as well. And I guess we've got to be careful when we're talking about nuclear to recognise where our limitations exist. We in terms of renewables, we're very good at building wind farms and solar plants and so forth. And I think if any technology, if it's proven to be clean, affordable, reliable, and can be delivered in the time frame that we need to replace our existing generation with, worth consideration, but it really does need to satisfy those criteria.
Good. Thanks, Owen. Bit of a political hot potato, that one.
Yes.
We're going to move on to another great question from Adam. What's happening well in the domestic engagement, development approval, or regulatory space, and perhaps not everywhere, maybe in a state or jurisdiction somewhere that you might be aware of, but anything that we may think is an opportunity if it were to be commonly applied. And Adam, I hope I've asked that question appropriately.
Do you want me to
well,
start
Maddie.
answering?
Owen first.
Yeah, go ahead, Maddie.
So look, I think it's important for us to engage with our regulators. A lot of them, they want to help our projects. No one likes to refuse a project. They know, as to Owen's point, how much work goes into it. So I think if we can engage with them, understand what they want, and what we need to do, so that we can really design our impact assessment and look at our design of our infrastructure. And I think, as I said before, if we can work together and collaborate, one wind farm is not the first wind farm that's ever been built in the country. I think we can work together. I think there's a lot of good things that are coming out in some of the projects that have been delivered. We shouldn't look at each other in silos, and really, we're a small country and a small industry. I think if we can work together and share that knowledge and work with our regulators to deliver a project with a common goal that's got a good outcome, I think it's really important. Owen, I don't know if you've got anything from an engagement perspective you want to add to that?
I think anytime we can provide clarity to a developer. So, what are the goalposts that we need to work towards? So I know there was a lot of discussion about some of the guidelines released in New South Wales last year in relation to wind farm developments. But one of the good things in that is that it set a benchmark for how the voluntary planning agreements need to be funded, and it has removed a point of uncertainty. So done, we've got that in the guidance, we can move on. So the clearer we can make our goalposts with any of these decisions, the easier it will be for industry to respond.
Excellent. Thanks, Owen and Maddie. There's a question which is directed for Owen from Zoe, and I think this might be something that you would have to deal with on a semi-regular basis when you're working with a community. But how can we deal with misinformation from media, and I might add social in brackets there as well, and the public used to derail projects?
Something I've pondered long and hard. So, look, I think we actually don't deal with it very well. So most of the people in the call, I'm assuming, have a reasonably advanced understanding of their area of specialty. And when we feel our area being attacked in some way, we want to get technical and we want to respond. We want to fight fire with facts. And that's probably the worst thing we can do. So, what we, when we're dealing with misinformation, you've just got to let it go to the keeper. So we're not in these projects. We're not here to change people's minds. What we are here to do, from a engagement point of view, is to make sure that we engage in the appropriate process, whereby we capture feedback from the community, and we're making the information that they need to reflect on or comment on available to them in ways in which is accessible. But we're not there to change people's minds. And I think when you think about every Christmas dinner that has gone wrong with an in-law and an argument, it's because somebody else has kicked off in response and had a blue. But if somebody says something that you disagree with, or perhaps might be outrageous, and you go, oh, okay, I don't really know about that. Let's move on to what I do know about, and let's talk about this development. It diffuses the discussion. And actually, I think we do. When you look at misinformation, there's lots of causes for it, but I think sometimes people have a lot going on in their lives. You have this is another stressor on them, and it's something, people don't move to a rural community to look at a turbine usually, usually they've moved there to look at a ridge line, or they've grown up there and it's looked a particular way. And there might be other things going on. And I think we just need to be empathetic to that and go, okay, if somebody says something inflammatory or tells us something that's not true, we make the information available to them, but we're not there to get in an argument with them. And I think that will help diffuse a lot of those discussions going forward. But it's always hard to not want to correct the record. But you can do it when it's related to your own project, but when it's related to other things, you've just got to take a step back and let people have their say and then refocus back on your project.
Thanks, Owen. It sounds like dealing with community with a bit of empathy in that regard, as well as what's coming through when I listen to your answer there. We've got one more question here from Christian. I'm just going to see how I can address it to Deb and Maddie in particular. Completing a site selection is a balancing act, and in some instances, avoidance of environmental impact, presumably, or ecological impact is either not possible or it'll have a significant impact on the economic prospect of that development or the viability of that project, of that development. So how does a project balance those things? And we've sort of touched on that throughout the presentation, but if you were to sort of look at this question and say, what would you do? How could you find a solution to balance those things on a specific development?
So I'm happy to start. I mean, I think really you have to be looking at all projects through a risk lens and, having your risk registers right from the start, but also being able to have open and honest conversations with people as well. Noting, I think, what Owen said, we shouldn't be focusing on the perfect. We need to be focusing, I don't want to say on the good enough, but in some respects, it's about what's approvable. So going in with a risk lens and understanding the cost that comes with that risk. And as I said, having that open and honest conversation to understand what those costs are and what the potential implications are as well. We do have to remember that all projects are also being developed within that policy framework. And ultimately, I don't think there's a jurisdiction in the country that doesn't require a minister to tick off some things, to tick something off at the end. So always got to go in with what's going to make the minister comfortable and what is the cost, whether that's a cost to the environment, in offsetting or other things, what's the cost to the community? You might not be able to achieve social license or other costs as well. So, you take a risk by going in knowing that there are impacts at the start. Owen, did you want to add something to that? Sorry.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. Like being honest about the risks associated with development is only going to lead to better decision making. Like you might not necessarily be able to control the decision, but you control the information that's being fed into that process. And if you can be honest about the risks, it's up to the project to make the decision as to whether to proceed. And in many times, and this is probably more for, well, I guess for all developers, it is a kindness to know your project has got critical risks so that you can effectively terminate it early and move on to another more promising prospect. It may not feel like a kindness at the time, but it is very important for good information to be going into those decision-making processes.
Yep. And look, if I can just add, I mean, I had the misfortune to work on a project a while ago where we did highlight some significant risks right at the start. The client, for whatever reasons, did not accept that they are a risk, and ultimately the project was not able to be approved.
I think there's a whole nother presentation on some of that actually, Deb. So I will just draw us to a close here. And I just want to say thank you to Owen and to Deb and to Maddie for your insights, the preparation, obviously, to prepare for this as well. Thank you for sharing what you have today, your experiences. And thank you to everyone who has joined us throughout this webinar as well. We hope that you've received some insights, you've received some interesting information that will help you in your projects. And of course, please feel free to reach out to Deb, whose contact details are there on the screen. And we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar, topic to be determined. And I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thanks all. Bye for now.
Thanks.